Well, you made it back to another.
You're talking to them. They made it back. Right?
I was talking to everyone, you included.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Well,
but also.
Made it back. People don't know that we have sessions back to back.
Yeah, no. That could be a season 2 reveal.
If they're watching, they'll see that. Wow, they don't change clothes between sessions.
Yeah, I'll allow
Family-
that to be.
like Family Feud and Steve Harvey.
You've referenced that before.
Have I really?
Yeah, sometimes you're really committed to like a reference, and I feel like you won't stop until I acknowledge it. Right? Yeah, you've used that maybe 3 times.
Really?
I would say this is at least the 3rd time you've referenced Steve Harvey and Family
Change of
Feud.
Clothes?
Yes. Yep. Yeah, at least the 3rd time.
So your therapist has dementia.
No,
Basically.
I think my podcast therapist just is really confident in their like analogies and references.
Is this going to go on the
Yeah,
thing?
I was like, what are you doing?
I'm having knee issues, Alex.
Oh,
So you get to...
that's okay. Dr. Steve was just stretching his leg in a weird way
Yeah.
for all you
I've had
audio only.
hammy issues
Really?
and knee issues lately. Yeah.
That's tough.
I think it's a winter of... I started running outside now, but a winter of working on treadmills and stuff like that. And
Yeah,
then
running
outside. So
running's not good for
I need to get cycling again.
cycling, rowing. It's another one I've heard is pretty good. Get a row machine.
Yeah. And I spent the whole winter of not playing. I had no hockey in the winter. Didn't even get on ice skates this past winter.
Do you typically get on ice skates?
Yeah.
Oh, speaking of hockey, I've been, I want to show you this. Awesome. I blocked a shot.
You did?
Yeah, it was in the playoffs. And check out this bruise.
Oh my gosh.
Isn't that wild? I'll show.
Why did you block a shot? Are you wearing breezers at least?
I am wearing breezers. However,
You
and this is a
impressed
fascinating thing with hockey, and I always see that the pros do this, and I'm like, what are you thinking, you idiots? There's the majority of your coverage is straight frontal, right? You got your shin pads, you got your breezers, you got your chest pad, but like hockey players, for whatever reason, to try and make themselves bigger, they expose more of their body that's completely unprotected, and that's where they get hit. And you're taught to just block a shot, go straight at the shot. Don't turn. That way, you're
more protected.
But for whatever reason in the moment, and I totally fell for this, I saw the guy winding up, and I was like, I got to block this. Okay, make yourself bigger. So I turned my leg, and I could have just been like this, and I would have hit my breezers, it would have been fine. But I opened up my leg, and he just socked me right in the completely unprotected part. Yeah.
The inner thigh.
The inner thigh. Yeah, the places players get hit the most, inner thigh, inner ankle, like here, or there's usually your shin guards don't cover all the way down. There's like this part of your ankle, so you get smoked there. Yeah, I didn't know that you play every winter.
I don't play in a league or anything.
Yeah, you just skate with
guys.
Mhm.
Yeah.
My dad wasn't a marathon runner, but he ran a lot, and he had to stop because his back just went to.
I had to stop playing basketball.
Because of your knees?
Knees.
Yeah.
Fingers.
Fingers. I remember you saying
Right.
that.
Fingers. Another Steve Harvey reference.
Yeah. I don't get that one.
Knees, fingers. Don't just. I probably
Good.
talked about fingers like as many times as I
You
talked
definitely
about Steve
showed me.
Harvey. The funk.
Yeah.
The jacked
Gosh.
up pinkies. Yeah.
And that's just from dislocating it?
It's getting. Yeah. I think the ligaments are all stripped out. Anyway, and this is not why people pay to listen to
Yep.
our podcast.
Yep.
But
You, if I recall correctly, last session you said, hey, Alex, I have a question for you for episode 2 of season 2.
yeah.
So let's hear it.
So my question is, what do you get differently from this therapeutic experience, if it is a therapeutic experience, than what you get from George or other people that you've been with?
I'll use George's comparison because that's really the most recent. I talk about stuff that I can't logistically talk about here.
Yeah.
So to that end, I just get to talk about stuff that's bothering me a little bit more, that's related to other people. So honestly, I can be angry with George, and I can say stuff that I wouldn't say in public. Right.
Until you won't, there are things you won't say in
Yeah.
here.
Because it's not even truth or fact. It's just emotion. It's anger.
Yeah.
And so I express my anger more with George, but also too, I get a much different sort of perspective. truthfully.
That's what I'm asking about.
Yeah.
So what's the difference between what perspective you get from me and the perspective you get from George?
Well, George, I've come to learn, is we're very similar in the sense that we're very vicissitude-y.
Explain that.
So
Season 2, people may not know.
For you new season 2 listeners, vicissitude is a word that Dr. Steve made up.
No,
to describe.
no, not at all. Not at all. This is your experience. I won't treat you like you're my brother. Like, oh, wrong, stupid, dumb answer. Okay.
So very philosophical. His approach to psychology and therapy is very much rooted in like philosophy, theoretical stuff, human nature, just like we love to talk about theoretical stuff. You know, why are humans motivated to think things like we talk? I mean, he put me onto a lot of interesting books.
This is you and George.
Yep.
Yeah.
He's always quoting stuff, and you know, sometimes that stems into just literature.
Yeah.
And you know, philosophers and stuff like that. So sometimes we can just get caught up in, it's a therapeutic moment for me because I don't get the opportunity to have those sort of in-depth conversations, and I find them fascinating.
Yeah.
But we start talking about the human condition and human nature and creativity and what it means to be creative, a creative human.
Yeah.
There's this book he put me on by Rollo May. Have you heard of him? He's an author. I'm pretty sure he's like a psychologist. It's in the 60s or something like that. But it's about the courage to create. And it's a fascinating, basically a psychologist approach, a take on creativity and how that affects the brain. And so I get that kind of perspective. It's much more vicissitude, which again,
Okay.
just so sometimes endless thought and analysis.
Okay.
In here, I think I get much more a much more practical approach to thoughts, feelings, and it just feels much more grounded. Like with George, we're kind of up in the clouds, floating around. And here, I feel like we're much more like, okay, well, what are the practical implications of what you're talking about?
Where the rubber hits the road.
Yeah.
Kind of thing.
Yep.
Uh-huh.
Which I think I've alluded to, and maybe I characterized it in a different way. But for example, mastery and acceptance.
Yeah.
You know, that was a phrase to me that was it resonated so well because it was like, hey, it's easy to just think about things endlessly.
Right.
What about just accepting and moving on? So when I chat with you, I feel like I get a much different perspective from George in that regard, which I like comparing the two.
Yeah.
Sometimes it's hard because sometimes I explain things and I just want you to say like, hey, that sucks. Or yeah, a lot of humans feel that way, but it's okay, Alex, you're doing a great job. Like give me a figurative like hug.
Yeah.
But also too, I like being grounded in reality and like not floating around in the clouds all the time. Vicissitude land.
Yeah. So in some ways you get both of those things.
Correct.
Because I think you like what you're doing with George. I think
Yes.
you enjoy those conversations.
There are also times where I get frustrated
Uh-huh.
and I'll get frustrated at George. And I'm like, sometimes I just wish I could go to someone who writes on a notepad and says, okay, here's what I think.
Do this.
Yeah. Which maybe there's some, I don't know, mastery.
There's people out there
Yeah.
like that. There's therapists out there like that, I think.
But it's just been cool to have two different perspectives. It's funny you ask that because I have been meaning to ask you a question, but I've kind of been scared to ask you it.
You got to save it for season 3.
Sure.
All right. I'm ready.
Because, and also too, because like, I don't want it to be too personal. Maybe it's something that, you don't want to talk about on the podcast. So I'll just say, I'll ask you. And if you don't, I can edit it out. So like this, for example, conversation we're having right now, I could just completely cut it out. But,
Which defeats the purpose of the podcast.
Yeah, well, unfortunately I'm in charge. I'm the producer and the engineer. So, I get to call the shots.
And the sponsor. These are great mics that you purchased for us.
Yeah. Cool. We can thank Cool Story for that. But in terms of like perspectives, I get the impression just based on our conversations and, you talking about sort of your past growing up, that you're probably a lot more religious than I am.
Maybe.
And I'm curious. I don't know like the proper way to ask, but like, does that impact your perspective at all, or like?
It would have to.
Yeah. And I sometimes think it's vastly. You're the only person right now that I know who's like ever been on a mission or anything like that. And I don't have any of that in my life. And I think about like, one might say, oh, that's a traditional way of looking at the world or something like that. I don't know. There's lots of people. I don't know. It's just been a fascinating thing for me because like it's very much not the antithesis, but different from how I look at the world and who I interact with and stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So did you ask your question?
No, I didn't.
Oh, you got to ask your question.
So are you like a Jehovah's Witness or?
I'm not.
Okay. Are you a Mormon?
I am.
Okay.
Yeah.
Because I was talking to Hank and he was like, so he was in a mission? I was like, yeah, what does that imply? Does that, and
so there is a saying in Finland that the only two people who learn, there's only two groups of people who learn Finnish.
Who?
Finnish babies and Mormon missionaries. Like it's such a crazy language.
Yeah, that's funny.
And everybody I know who went there on their mission is enthralled and enamored with the language.
Do you do a lot of like, is Finland a popular place for Mormons to do their mission?
No.
So that could be said about any country with a complex language, because in theory, Mormons go all over the world.
They go all over the world.
Well,
but there's not that many countries whose language is as complex as Finnish. There's like Navajo and and Japanese. I mean,
I can tell you, I think I have Hank's last name. I still to this day can't pronounce it. It's got like 15 letters in it. It's remarkable. Let's see if he's in here. No, it's just Henka. I didn't even bother putting in his last name because it's impossible to spell. So, yeah, I mean, the reason I ask is because a part of me has been thinking about this. I'm like, well, that would align in terms of he might not spend his time thinking about all these things that there's no answers to because, I don't know, without sounding judgmental, it's like I always assume that people who ascribe to certain religions, they like kind of have more things either figured out or the religion compels them to not think about it so much.
Or the religion has figured it out for you, so you don't have to think anymore. You can turn it over to a matter of faith.
Yeah.
I bet there's a lot of that.
Yeah.
In my life.
So that's why in George is the complete opposite of that, right? He's like, well, absolutely nothing is certain. There's no guaranteed anything. So let's talk. Anything's possible. Let's talk about it.
But I feel like I embrace that as well.
I think so too. Yes. We had a conversation about space and the universe.
Yeah.
So yeah. But also I don't
remember that. Did I mention Steve Harvey at all in that conversation?
Well, I forget what prompted it, but we were talking about the soul and spirit. And we talked about how like the most common element in the universe is also the same most common element in human beings, which is carbon.
Mm-hmm.
We were talking about that kind of stuff. And that's all like big brain stuff. And so it all kind of left me confused because to your point, I was like, yeah, we talk about philosophical stuff.
He can do both.
Yeah. But I mean, based on my limited knowledge of the religion that you practice, based on the one South Park episode I saw. Did you watch that, by the way?
No, I don't really like South Park, but but I know I have a lot of friends who do, a lot of Mormon friends who do. And the guys who created South Park also created the Book of Mormon movie.
I went to the play, which I thought it was a little overrated, honestly. Everyone thought it was hilarious, but I was like, well, I mean, it's okay. Anyway, I've been meaning to, I've been sort of not struggling with it, but it's like, it's a conversation I've wanted to have, but I didn't want it to be It's none of my business kind of a thing.
You know, in the typical, I actually think it is your business as a client. I think it's your business to wonder about your therapist and wonder where their values and values and standards and things like that are.
Where they,
And maybe even where they come from. So I've got a number of clients who, over time, from stories or they've known people who are the same religious orientation as I am, and they'll ask, "Are you Mormon?" I'm like, and I don't mind talking about it. I think the traditional way that therapists are trained to answer questions about their personal lives is...
Why is that important to you?
Why is that important? Yeah, you've been to enough therapy that you know what the question and what the
Yeah.
response is. Why is that important? And this is really about you, Alex. This is not about me. And does it matter to you whether I'm Jehovah's Witness or Muslim or Mormon or or Catholic or whatever?
Yeah. And to your point, for me as a patient, it does matter, but not in the sense that I get like angry or anything like that.
Yeah.
More so as like, I want to know where they're coming from, or if they have a certain set of beliefs, or if there's anything that sort of, what their principles are, what influences their thinking. It's just good to know the person a little bit more, I guess. And also too, it's super fascinating to me because I don't know if this exists in the Mormon religion, but like you earlier in the podcast had talked about the profession of a therapist is kind of unique to Western culture, because in a lot of other cultures they have like, you go to see someone else, like you go to see a shaman. Or
you're religiously your pastor.
Yeah. So, and this is more curiosity than anything. Does the Mormon church, the Mormon religion, have a stance on mental health and therapy? They're pretty open about it.
I would say that I've seen that change over my lifetime.
Okay.
And when I started being when I expressed an interest in becoming a mental health professional, I think there was some cultural pushback. Like, we have clergy who can do that kind of thing. And in fact, I've had people say, well, therapy's great, but not if you're a member of the church. You don't really need therapy, because if you're living your life in accordance to the principles,
you wouldn't have
any problems, which I don't believe.
Yeah. Me either.
And so, a lot of I've had a lot of students who are LDS, who are Mormons. I've had a lot of colleagues who are mental health professionals who are Mormons. So that has shifted. That language has shifted. But I'm 57 years old, and so I remember, going to therapy was a shameful thing, and my parents would talk about, oh, they're in therapy right now, and kind of this hushed tone. And so, but I don't know that that's how much of that is LDS Mormon culture, because I grew up in Canada. I don't really have as much of that Mormon culture as maybe somebody from Utah might have.
Sure.
Which is kind of the hub of
Mormonism. I know little about it, and that's what I assume. That's what I think of when I hear it.
But I think there's more acceptance of mental health. I think a lot of people from my religious group have also not been done well by mental health. People have said your beliefs are restrictive and your beliefs are confining.
Yeah.
And it would be better if you did X, Y, and Z, and you should probably just leave your church because you have a strong theme of perfectionism.
That would piss me off if someone said that to me.
Yeah, and it leaves people who are in religious communities like, well, where do I go for help? If I go here, you're telling me to give up this thing that's very important to me, and if I go to my religious leader, they're not open to the secular things that I need to be talking about. They just hit me back with religious dogma or
that would be very isolating.
Can be.
And it's also extremely ironic because it's the exact opposite of what therapy is supposed to be. It's supposed to be a place where anything and everything can exist at the same time, as opposed to like, nope, I can't help you unless you ascribe to this certain beliefs that I have. It's like the complete opposite of therapy, in my opinion. It's like we claim people who are not really, like, I'm going to be a representative of non-affiliated people. It's like we claim to be the most open-minded, right? Because we don't ascribe to any one set of beliefs. Yet we would pass judgment upon a person, be like, "Ooh, I can't help you unless you ascribe to my lack of, belief system."
Yeah,
which is super ironic and silly. Also, too, like it's got me thinking what it must be like in other, like the Catholic Church. I'm sure has the exact or similar thing where it's like, well, you don't need a therapist; you need to talk to, go to confession. Mm-hmm. Or in Muslim culture, I'd be super interested. I I could talk to someone about that. Like, is it a similar kind of? Is there any stigma about mental health? Like, you need to see the, is it the imam?
Imam.
Yeah, yeah,
Well, I can tell you, I have students who are Muslim,
yeah.
and they have said to me that they are going into this mental health training program because they see the need for mental health services in their religious and faith community. So I think that many religious communities need qualified mental health people
Totally.
who can work within a belief system, who can work within someone's cultural and religious orientation.
Well,
Yeah.
also, we all have our lanes, and not to make a like sort of horrid analogy, but it's like people talking about reforming the police, right? Because the police get sent to any situation where it could be a mental health crisis. It's like a police doesn't need to go there. Someone who specializes in that needs to deal with that. And similarly, it's like a member of a clergy person or a member of a religion, like they have things that they specialize. They shouldn't be a catch-all for everything. So I would, yeah, that's encouraging to know that people.
So do you worry at all? Do you give thought at all to, well, how much of Steve is influenced by this organization that calls the shots in his life,
Yeah.
or that tells him there's a certain way to live, and so now I'm getting some watered down version of Mormonism that he's peddling to me.
Great question. I would say it's like 25%.
25% worry.
Yeah.
Okay. and 75%
Just like
other.
insane curiosity. Like there's so many like potentially offensive questions I want to ask you about.
You should ask him.
About the stereotypes of Mormonism and stuff like that. But I have obviously been just analyzing you every time we sit down.
Yeah, I feel it.
But like, you know, I'm capable of making decisions based on people far beyond. I mean, that's such a
Far beyond stereotypes, or
it's a kind of a superficial thing to judge someone on. I mean, there's obviously some implications there, but I'm much more concerned with the things you say. You know, for example, I think the only time I ever got pissed off was when I felt like you were bored with what I was saying, or when I felt like you weren't like coddling me as much. You're not coddling me, but like being warm enough to me. Like those kinds of like those behavior is much more important to me than set of belief systems. The 25% of curiosity or the 25% of worry is, well, you know, maybe in that religion he grew up in, he was not conditioned to respond in a certain way, you know? I don't know. Long story short, our conversation has been such where not, you know, you've never been like, well, Alex, the truth is here. Do you want to find the truth? Because it's here. Come with us. You know, you've never been any remotely close like that. Hell, the stupid entrepreneur group I joined, way more like that than...
They proselytize or preach.
Yeah, oh my God. They're basically like, you're either with us or against us. Way more vibes. So, yeah. Not, but just, I've met... You're the second Mormon I've ever met in my entire life. Do you believe that? One, I worked with him.
I can believe that.
He was in advertising. Nice guy.
Uh-huh.
I got really drunk at a holiday party and I just sat next to him for like an hour and I was like firing off questions. And so, because I was just so fascinated and curious. Yep. But I don't know any really religious people in my life. Like, none of my relationships. Haley's family, she grew up pretty Catholic, but they stopped. Don't tell Jesus that though. That stays between us.
I don't know. There might be a different Jesus. I don't know.
Catholics, I don't know how that works. Yeah.
Maybe my Jesus knows his Jesus.
Yeah. I think had it been Scientology, then we would have had a problem. Honestly, that's where I would have
How come?
Just
you have ideas about Scientology?
Yes. Yep.
Yeah.
Yep. And the whole Xenu thing.
I'm not familiar with it. So
yeah, yeah. I mean, even I have my limits.
I mean, the one thing about being in a religion that is often maligned and oppressed is that you have much more relaxed standards about other people's religions, and you're much more tolerant of, hey, You go believe what you want to believe.
Yeah, that's good. Because I would assume it'd be the opposite, and it would just make you more angry and defensive.
No, I think it can. I think some people can dig in and say that we have the truth over here, and there's only one truth.
And you guys are all going to hell. So tease us all you want.
Yeah.
We'll see who's laughing in the end.
Yeah. Well, that was what the South Park episode was about.
Yeah, it's cool. I enjoy having a new perspective in therapy.
Yeah.
And I don't know how to describe it. I wouldn't describe it as, I'm not like, well, I have George and then I have my Mormon therapy. I wouldn't describe it that way.
Right.
But maybe you know what it is? It's the Canadian thing. That's what it was. I knew something was off.
The Canadian who hadn't played hockey.
It makes sense. The second you're like, I grew up in Canada, it's like it clicked. Yeah. I wish I had a better way of articulating, but like, I don't know if pragmatic or practical approach.
But this was something you've been thinking about for a while.
Yeah. Yep.
And wondering. You talked to Hanka about it. You talked to maybe some other people, maybe Haley or whatever, and didn't know how to ask. So I wonder if people who are listening, who are also wondering about their therapist, is it okay to talk? Is it okay to go to your therapist and say, hey, are you
ask them questions? Yeah. Because like from my perspective, I didn't want to, I don't want to make my therapist feel uncomfortable, because I've had instances where I asked a question and I went a little too deep and I touched a nerve, and that from a patient's perspective, at least for me, was really jarring, because it's like, oh, if I can rattle this guy or this girl, am I safe anywhere? Like, I thought this was the one place where I could accidentally offend someone or something.
Say anything.
Yeah. Yep.
That's a great point.
Yeah. I mean, there was one time we had one session and I asked a question or I made a joke and he was like, no, or something. I was like, oh, okay. All right. I'm sorry. I really, I don't want to do that. I don't want to last thing I want to do is make someone uncomfortable. So it's
so
like,
curious.
Yeah.
So curious about what that was.
Me too. I think I made a joke about their intake form being like, there was a bunch of misspellings on it. Yeah. And
sacred ground, brother.
And he was like, please do not bring this stuff up. I don't do that. I was like, oh, okay. But back to your question, I mean, what is allowed? What can if a patient is curious, can they ask?
I think you get to ask anything.
Yeah.
I think, like you said, this is a place you get to ask anything, but you also don't get to control what the answer is, right? So if your client, if you say, well, Dr. Harris, how often do you have sex?
It would be, please don't answer that.
No, those are questions that I've had before. Like, what's a normal amount of?
I would feel so uncomfortable if I asked a question and it caused you to feel uncomfortable. That would be like nails on a chalkboard for me. I think that's just like a weird fear that I have.
Yeah.
That I could say something or ask a question that would cause you to say something like, Alex, that's inappropriate. Please don't say that. Don't ask that.
I mean, the way I look at it is I want to be in a position where I help people become more real and honest about their life with the people that are around them. And so you're one of the people around me. So if you ask me a question, I'm going to try and be as real as possible.
Yep.
In my response.
As much as you're allowed to.
Yeah, but what does that mean? As much as I'm allowed to say whatever I want. It may not.
Yeah.
But we have a code of ethics. I've taken an oath, a vow to first do no harm. I don't want to try and say things that are harmful to people.
Yep. I guess that's what I mean. Like, you'd answer a question as best as you could, knowing it's not going to harm anyone.
Yeah.
It's not going to bring anyone's confidentiality in jeopardy. That's all I meant.
Yeah.
It would align with your code of ethics.
Yep, exactly.
But also, and I think that's why I feel comfortable talking to you, it requires a level of like self-confidence in terms of identity. And, I've had experiences where I felt like I've met with, dare I say, not insecure therapists, but therapists who were dealing with some stuff and, had nerves to touch, so to speak.
Yeah.
And that kind of, not to sound, I mean, we're all a mess. or the best of us is a mess, or something like that. But anyway,
Is that a saying?
our marriage counselor says that the rest. What does she say? The best of Haley will remind me. Yeah, it can be intimidating, because again, the last thing you want to do is piss off the person who knows all this stuff about you.
Wow.
Yeah.
Does that go through your head?
Yeah. Not, I mean, it's a real fear.
Mm.
Why is that surprising to you? Humans can be
Douchey.
Yeah, they can be vengeful and spiteful, and maybe it's because I've experienced that, where I've trusted someone and I felt like they've used it against me.
Well, my guess is most people have had some kind of experience like that, where you've trusted and the trust has been broken or breached in some way. Like the thought about, like, if you said something that got under my skin or hurt my feelings, like, would I be vengeful and spiteful? Would I start broadcasting things about Alex? Like, that just doesn't register for me. But I'm not everybody. I'm sure there are people who would go do that. If that happened, I mean, I could see my license being called in question, my profession, those kinds of things.
I guess it's not a rational fear of mine, but it's like, if I were to offend you, or I was to offend a therapist, they could start, making, kind of like put downs, or they do subtle things to dismiss me, or, could be cold. Or, it's just, it's scary to think that you could have, I don't know how to describe it, but there's something to be said about me as a patient. Like, I get stuff from this therapist, like they provide something to me.
Yeah.
And for them to cut that off, it could be out of anger or something.
Yeah.
It's triggering because
it could be a threat. It could be scary.
Not to be super cliche, and kind of reminds me of growing up as a child with, like, my parents. It's like, if you do something accidentally to anger the all-knowing, all-being caregiver, and it cuts you off and you're isolated, to sit in that isolation is it's like, I'm never going back there. I don't want to do it. Okay. What can I do to make sure I don't get cut off like that? It sort of reminds me of that process.
I got to watch my step. I can go up to a certain place.
Yeah.
But I dare not cross that
I think
line.
I personally, Alex, like, that's a skeleton in the closet / that's like a pain point, or that's a sensitive nerve, is this idea of, like, trusting someone, having a good relationship with them, there being care, positive emotions, and then getting that cut off.
Yeah.
For something I did accidentally, or,
or out of ignorance. I didn't know I couldn't ask.
Not
this.
intentionally.
Yeah.
Is a frightening feeling for me. It's something, I have, like, past trauma with that, or I don't know how you would describe it.
Yeah, but it makes some sense to me, and I think every now and then I get reminded of the risk that it is to be a client in therapy, to be a patient in therapy, and how much you're putting out there and hoping that the person you're talking to is going to treat it with respect and dignity. And I think that's a big thing. I think therapists often forget that.
It's interesting. What are you guys thinking about?
You don't want to know. No, I just think, we're like brain surgeons, except it's not brain surgery, but at some level,
very
a brain
high
surgeon,
level of comparison there, doctors.
except that brain surgeons are not as bright as we are.
They're not as smart or as accomplished as we are.
They just don't have the test scores that we do.
Yeah.
No, but I think a brain surgeon, it's always going to be delicate and difficult, but I think they probably approach the next surgery with a degree of callousness. Like, I need to do this, I need to do that, I need, like, there's an order of operations. And my guess is that for everybody, there's a level of routinization,
Yeah.
and callousness that you approach it. So I think for therapists to go, hey, it's really hard for people to come into your office. Like just to open that door and sit down or to make that call, I think we can forget that sometimes. I don't know if I told you, I was at a health club once and I got on a machine next to somebody that I had been working with, and that person would not acknowledge me at all. And I didn't even think about it. When we met in session, that person indicated, I don't want my therapy life spilling out into other areas. And when I saw you at the gym, it brought back all the crap that we deal with in here. And so it was a good reminder of me okay, so I have a certain callousness about who I see. And I made certain assumptions that if I saw somebody in
like,
public,
"Hey."
I would, yeah.
Yeah.
And I've had clients who, one client when I was at Syracuse University who yelled across the quad, "Hey, there's my shrink." I think I've told that story in here, maybe.
Maybe. I don't remember that one.
And another person who says, "I don't want
Yeah.
any part of my therapy life
I was the latter.
spilling out." So
Well, that is, I mean, it's interesting to hear you say it because, yeah, it's routine in the sense that you've done it, you do this all day, every day. It's like nothing really surprises you or it's not as traumatic for you, right? Because it's another day at the office. I get that. I totally get that. That's not to say it's less meaningful. It's just like,
correct. Or that the brain surgery is not as important, or let's keep it with the metaphor, please.
Yep. Yeah. Yep. Also, too, it reminds me of like people have asked me, "Oh, do you want to be a therapist?" I'm like, "No way," because I can't imagine doing that all day, 10 people a day, and I think I know some therapists are totally overbooked. It's like, how do you juggle all that? So I understand.
Yeah, we have this thing called compassion fatigue in our field, right?
Yep. I get in my field
worn out.
Creative. Like I get sick of thinking of stuff.
Yeah.
Because I'm just coming up with, I get fatigued all the time. I can only imagine dealing with, let's say you meet 8 people a day. It's like, oh, these are 8. What if they're 8 really intense conversations? That's my day.
Yeah.
Yeah. No,
and there's no amount of Chat GPT can get you through it.
For now, dude.
For now.
For now. Yeah, you better
wait a week or 2.
Yeah. I mean, I just had a conversation with my intern this morning and I was like, I want to impress upon you, ChatGPT is no joke. And we started going through his tasks with ChatGPT, and I was like, dude, the sooner you can master this thing, the less replaceable you will be. So, it in my field, like ChatGPT replaces entry level creatives.
That's what I hear.
So
I've heard that from a buddy of mine. Who says he could replace 2 or 3 of the people on his line with ChatGPT.
So not to totally shift, but it's like, to me, the focus is, okay, young people should be mastering. I know how to manage ChatGPT.
So even the term ChatGPT sounds something like therapy, right? Chat and group therapy. ChatGPT, group therapy.
What is it? Talkspace or Better Health? One of those is exclusively through text messaging.
Yeah, I don't know.
One of them is, and you find a therapist and you just text with them. And what's to say that could be a bot?
It could be Siri or Alexa.
I chatted with one for this purpose. I was like, okay, let's see what their chops are. And I was like, hey, can I talk to you about my anxiety and stuff like that? And it was like, sure. And I was like, I started asking about books that I had read, and it
knew them.
Read everything. But that's for another day. We'll worry about that later.
We need to wrap up.
Yeah, we do
for today.
Yep.
So,
well, thank you for letting me ask questions.
Yeah, ask away.
And
I would think that if you had questions about questions, ask that too.
Yeah. Well, I'll think on that for our next session.
Okay.
Until then,
change of wardrobe.
Think of how you can bring Family Feud back up again. I'll be really excited to hear that for the 11th time. And everyone else out there, stay happy.